It was a quiet Sunday morning in the sleepy suburb of Skokie, Illinois. The kind of place where the loudest sound on a winter weekend might be the crunch of boots on snow. A town where neighbors wave, children play on the sidewalks, and crime feels like a distant rumor. But on January 28, 1979, the illusion of safety was shattered forever. Inside a modest brick house on Kenneth Avenue, a young woman was found murdered, brutally attacked in her own bedroom. Her name was Susan Schwarz. She was 28 years old, and despite decades of investigations, media coverage, and countless theories, her case remains unsolved. Who killed Susan Schwarz? And why? Before we dig into the details of this disturbing cold case, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button if you care about justice for the voiceless. And don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your theories. You might notice something that others have missed. This is more than just storytelling. Together, we're investigating. Now, let's step back in time and try to piece together what really happened to Susan Schwarz. To understand the crime, we need to understand the woman behind it. Susan Schwarz wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy, but she was deeply loved. Born in 1950, Susan was the only daughter of her parents, Harold and Alice Schwarz. She grew up in Skokie, attended local schools, and graduated from Niles Township High School. Later, she went on to earn a degree from the University of Illinois. By all accounts, Susan was bright, independent, and kind. After college, she returned to Skokie and moved into a small home on Kenneth Avenue, just a few blocks from where she grew up. She worked as a legal secretary for a prominent law firm in downtown Chicago. Her co-workers described her as dependable, friendly, and meticulous. Susan wasn't someone who made enemies. She didn't have a reputation for partying or risky behavior. She lived a quiet life, perhaps too quiet for what happened next. It was Susan's father, Harold, who made the grim discovery. That Sunday morning, he hadn't heard from his daughter and grew concerned. He decided to check in on her. What he found inside her home would haunt him and the entire town for decades. Susan was found lying face down in her bedroom. She had been struck multiple times in the head with a blunt object. Some sources report signs of strangulation as well. Her room showed signs of a struggle. Drawers were open. Objects were overturned. But nothing of real value seemed to be missing. Her purse was still there. Jewelry was untouched. There were no signs of forced entry. The killer had likely known Susan, or at the very least, had been let in voluntarily. Her father immediately called the police. Skokie detectives arrived and began processing the scene. The entire house was searched. Neighbors were questioned, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. The murder weapon was never recovered. With little physical evidence and no clear motive, investigators had to consider every possibility. Was this a burglary gone wrong? A stalker? An ex-boyfriend? Or something even more sinister? Let's break down the main theories. Theory 1. The random intruder. The idea of a stranger randomly breaking into Susan's home in broad daylight seemed unlikely. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows, no doors kicked in. And why would a thief enter a home just to kill the occupant and leave without stealing anything? Skokie wasn't known for random violence. In fact, it had one of the lowest crime rates in the area. This theory quickly lost steam. Theory 2. A personal crime. This was the theory that detectives focused on. The overkill nature of the attack, the blunt force trauma, the signs of strangulation, suggested rage. Passion. The kind of violence that's usually personal. Susan's friends and family were questioned extensively. A few former romantic partners were looked into, but no one stood out. No history of abuse. No threatening letters. No suspicious behavior. Still, police believed that Susan likely knew her killer. Theory 3. The legal connection. Susan worked as a legal secretary for a downtown Chicago law firm. Some speculated that she might have come across sensitive information, something that someone didn't want exposed. But there was no evidence that she had been involved in any controversial cases. No known threats. And co-workers dismissed the idea. saying she handled mostly mundane civil matters. Still, the theory couldn't be completely ruled out. Despite media coverage and public outcry, the case began to stall. Leads dried up. Evidence degraded. In the days before DNA technology, forensic analysis was limited. The community grieved, but time moved on. Susan's family, devastated, refused to let her memory fade. Her father, Harold, made periodic public appeals, hoping someone, anyone, would come forward with information. But no one did. In the late 1980s, the case was briefly reopened as forensic methods advanced. Police re-examined the evidence, hoping something new could be found. But again, they came up empty-handed. In the 2000s, new detectives reviewed the case as part of a cold case initiative. They interviewed old witnesses, re-examined crime scene photos, and tested whatever evidence could be salvaged. But by that point, so much had been lost, either physically or to the erosion of memory. Still, one thing stood out. There had been no sign of forced entry. That detail remained central to every theory. Susan had either opened the door willingly, or someone had a key. In 2013, an anonymous tipster called the Skokie Police Department. The caller claimed to have information about the Susan Schwarz case. The voice on the other end suggested that someone close to Susan had confessed the crime years ago, during a drunken breakdown. But the caller never identified themselves. And the alleged confessor? The tipster wouldn't name them. The call was brief, cryptic, and ultimately untraceable. Police tried to track down the source, but the trail went cold once again. To this day, the identity of the caller and their connection to the case remains a mystery. Let's go back to that Sunday morning one more time. A woman is brutally attacked in her own home. No sign of forced entry. No valuables taken. The scene suggests rage, not robbery. What else could we infer? One detail often overlooked is that Susan was dressed in casual clothes, not nightwear, when she was found. That suggests she had been up and about, perhaps expecting someone. Maybe she had a visitor. Maybe she invited them in. If so, what started as a conversation might have escalated into an argument, and then violence. Another theory suggests a secret relationship, someone married, perhaps, or with something to lose. But again, police found no evidence of Susan being involved in anything clandestine. Unless she kept it well hidden. Could the killer have been someone from her workplace? A client? A friend with unrequited feelings? No answers. Just possibilities. Today, advances in forensic science have cracked decades-old cold cases, some even older than Susan's. With genealogy databases and new DNA analysis methods, even the smallest fragment of evidence can be a breakthrough. So why hasn't that happened here? According to sources, much of the original evidence in the Susan Schwarz case is either degraded or lost. Some say the chain of custody wasn't properly maintained in the early years. Others claim key items, like the suspect's clothing fibers or potential fingerprints, were never collected. In other words, the case may have been mishandled. However, there is hope. If even a small trace of DNA still exists, perhaps under Susan's fingernails or on a piece of fabric, it could be tested with today's advanced methods. All it takes is one match. And that brings us to the call to action. Susan Schwarz's case has remained unsolved for over 4 decades. But that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Somewhere out there, someone knows something. Maybe you grew up in Skokie. Maybe your family lived nearby. Maybe a relative once told you a strange story about that winter in 1979. We're asking you, come forward. Even the smallest detail, something you thought was irrelevant, could be the missing puzzle piece. Anonymous tips are accepted, and cold case investigators are always on the lookout for new leads. Susan's parents passed away without knowing who killed their daughter. But her remaining relatives, and a community that still remembers her, deserve closure. Justice delayed is still justice. The story of Susan Schwarz is more than an unsolved mystery. It's a reminder of how fragile safety can be, how quickly a quiet life can be stolen, and how important it is to keep asking questions, no matter how much time has passed. If you found this video compelling, help us keep Susan's story alive. Like this video to boost visibility. Share it with friends, especially anyone who might have ties to Skokie or Chicago in the late 1970s. And please, subscribe to this channel. We cover cold cases, forgotten crimes, and the stories that deserve answers. Every week, we dig deeper into the shadows. If you have theories, drop them in the comments. If you have information, reach out to the Skokie Police Department or submit an anonymous tip. Because someone out there knows the truth. And it's time for them to speak.